Hello, I'm going to take a look at the game between Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura. This game was played in 2023 and it was a bullet game, but one that has a lot of interesting situations and positions. So, let me start. Magnus starts with e4, g6, knight f3, bishop g7, d4, d6, bishop d3, knight f6, castle, rook e1, knight c6, c3, e5, h3. Essentially, this is kind of aggressive, a bit aggressive. It should be aggressive opening for black, but in reality it turned out to be not as aggressive, I think, as Nakamura wanted it to be. And I guess he didn't get from the opening what he wanted to get, and it would be something. My guess that he would want to get something like white pawn on c4 and him playing maybe a6 b5 and having some pressure on d4. At least in this pure offensive opening, black sometimes goes for playing a6, b5, and c6, and usually also white puts the pawn on f4. In this game, Magnus Carlsen played a bit different, and the kind of position is also a bit different, and it's more solid for white. Rook e8, knight b to d2, a6, knight f1, b6. Apparently what Nakamura wants is he wants to fianchetto his bishop to b7 and create some pressure on e4 pawn. Maybe he is going to play bishop b7 and capture on d4 with the pawn, e takes d4, and then play something like knight a5 or maybe maybe even knight b8. Knight g3 is played, bishop b7, bishop e3. Okay, Carlsen isn't afraid of anything that is connected with the capture on d4. For example, capture on d4. Let's capture with a pawn, and let's check out move d5, e5. Is there such a thing like knight e4? Probably not. Knight e5, d takes e5, bishop e5, e4, and there is essentially, I don't see any serious compensation for the pawn. So capture on e4, you capture with a pawn, d5 doesn't work, maybe knight a5, but then I see that there is move b4, and essentially knight a5 doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay, so the capture on d4 wasn't didn't have a great potential in it, and Nakamura plays instead h6. h6. Essentially white has the position already in good squares, but what would be good for white is to play queen d2 and rook a to d1. And also maybe there is an option of playing d4, d5 and then starting a kind of attack on the queen side to play d4, d5 and then to play b4, c4 and c5, or b4, a4 and a5. Something like this. Queen d2 is played. Carlsen attacks pawn on h2. Black now has to defend the pawn with king h7. Carlsen plays d5 and probably he goes for the plan of attacking the queen side. Knight b8, Nakamura plays c4, knight b to d7, b4, and Nakamura plays a5. If, for example, in this situation already white is having an idea of playing c5, and if, for example, black played something like queen e7, then at this moment c5 to play c5 is impossible, because after capture on c5 it's going to be capture d takes c5, b takes c5, and knight c5, and white is incapable of doubling the pawns to black. So to play currently c5 is impossible, but what white can do is to play rook a to c1 and prepare this push c5, and now it's difficult to defend against this push for black. If now black tries standard move a5, then the idea is that if white captures on a5, then there is a capture with the rook, and now move c5, square c5 is well protected, and it's just not going to make sense to play c5. But if white doesn't have to capture on a5, white instead can go for c5 immediately and to play c5 without play and to play c5 right away. So after c5, probably d takes a5, c5, d takes c5, b takes c5. It seems like a great position for white. If black captures on c5, then b takes c5, b takes bishop c5, bishop b takes c5. A lot of, and definitely white has a good position. The pawn on c5 is weak. Okay, so before was played, Nakamura plays a5, a3, a takes b, a takes b. Now there is significant struggle in the middle game, in the center of the board, and but there are a couple of interesting positions that I would want to show you, since I think they are quite interesting. B takes c6, not to say that all the things that are currently happening on the board are not interesting. Bishop f1, queen c7, rook a8, rook a8, rook d1, bishop f8, queen c2, bishop a4. Essentially what happened is that Carlsen didn't make a blunder. Bishop a4 doesn't win an exchange. Instead, there is a powerful move after bishop a4 that was played by Nakamura. There is queen a2 that pins a knight, and if now Nakamura captures on d1, then there is a capture on a8. So it's an exchange. Maybe bishop f3 now, g take f3, and that's it. White position is still better, I would say. But then it's an exchange, it's not a win. So maybe Nakamura had to go for this. It's difficult for me to say. Bishop c6 is played, queen b1, rook a4, bishop d3, queen c8, knight e2, queen a8, knight c3, rook a3, knight d5, knight d5, c takes d5, bishop a4, rook c1, bishop rook b3. Now Nakamura threatens to win a pawn on b4, and maybe he is even better at this point. Queen c2, rook b4, queen c7, king g8, and now there is queen c8 is played, and after king g8, Magnus makes an interesting move, very interestingly looking rook a1. So this is essentially a very interesting position that I was referring to earlier in this video, and I think it's worthwhile to spend a couple of minutes for these positions, since there is essentially after rook a1, black can gain certain advantage, and instead of playing rook a1, black had an option of gaining even bigger advantage. So there is essentially a win here in this situation, and a win is the following: bishop d2, rook b2, bishop f3, rook b3, knight d2, rook a3. This attack on the rook is interesting. So many moves so many moves, and the rook is kept getting attacked. Knight b1, rook b3, and bishop c3 now, and it wins an exchange after several moves. It was like 5 moves only by light pieces that attacked the rook, and it leads to winning an exchange. And after this, white has a very good position. White's queen on c7 is very powerful. So maybe rook c3, knight c3. It's difficult to play this position with black. Okay, but Magnus Carlsen missed this option, missed this opportunity, and instead he played rook a1, which is a very natural move, but not as strong, and allowed black to activate his pieces. b5 was played, and instead of playing b5, black had an option of playing knight c5, and it would lead to a draw. It would lead to a draw, since it's difficult to say the reason for this. This is just the evaluation that I checked out, and so it's difficult to see, but this is a natural move that activates the piece. If white captures on c5, it seems good. And if white plays something like bishop c2, then maybe knight e4, even maybe this greedy move is good. Maybe there is no bishop d2 now, there is no queen c3, and bishop e4 doesn't make sense. So okay, so knight c5 was an interesting option, and after knight c5, white had to go for a draw after bishop c2, and instead rook and knight e4 that I mentioned is good, but is okay, but black also had immediate draw, rook c4, bishop d3. This move is excellent. Rook b4, bishop c2. White with every move exploits a pin either on e4 or on c5. Okay, so knight c5 was good. b5 instead, Nakamura plays b5, and Magnus Carlsen misses that there is an option to capture a knight on d7 now. So it was double blunder. Nakamura blundered the knight, and Hikaru blunders the knight on d7. Instead, Magnus plays king h2, queen b8. Again, blunder continues. Queen d7. Now Magnus pays attention, so it was a blunder that lasted for 2 moves. Rook b3, bishop f1, rook c3, rook c1, rook c1, bishop c1, bishop c2, knight d2, b4, queen c6, queen a7, queen c2, queen f. Well, it's like, it feels like more blunders. Instead of blundering another bishop, Nakamura had to play b3, still with a lost position, probably, most likely, because he's down a piece. So queen a7, queen c2, queen f2, queen d1. Essentially, black has just two pieces, completely one position, and the rest is trivial. And to win with 2 pieces more is not a difficult task. So Carlsen won, Nakamura resigned. Thank you for watching.